Long before nations formed, before cities rose from dust, and before the world was divided by language and kingdoms, ancient storytellers whispered the name of a man who defied the destiny of all humans, a man who, according to the oldest scriptures, did not die. He simply disappeared, taken by forces beyond comprehension. His name was Enoch, the seventh from Adam, a figure wrapped in layers of legend, secrecy, and profound cosmic significance. To understand why his story became the backbone of countless myths, and why his writings were later banned, burned, and buried, we must journey back to a time when the world was still young, when the line between the seen and the unseen was thin enough to cross, when celestial beings walked among humans openly, and the laws of heaven were not yet sealed away. The Bible gives Enoch only a few fleeting sentences. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That is all. No details, no explanation about how, nor why, nor what it means to walk with God. But ancient cultures, from Mesopotamia to Ethiopia, from desert monasteries to hidden caves near the Dead Sea, preserved another version of his story, an expansive, multi-layered account of a man who witnessed the architecture of the universe itself. In these forbidden texts, Enoch is not merely a man of faith. He is a traveler between worlds, a guardian of divine secrets, a witness to the crimes of angels, and perhaps the most extraordinary, he is portrayed as a messenger chosen to bridge the gap between divine justice and the chaos that had overtaken the early world. But why did ancient authorities later forbid his writings? Why did powerful religious councils declare his visions too dangerous for the common world? Why is a book once held sacred by early Christians now missing from nearly every Bible on the planet? To answer that, we must first understand the world Enoch lived in, a world vastly different from our own. Imagine a time before the flood. Humanity was few in number, scattered in small clusters, living close to the natural rhythms of Earth. The skies were darker at night, and the stars burned brighter, so bright that ancient people believed they were living beings, guardians or watchers, observing the actions of mankind. For them, the heavens were not silent, they were alive. The earliest civilizations believed the world was a battlefield of energies, a meeting point between higher and lower realms. Celestial beings, angels, messengers, watchers, were not distant myths, but active presences. Some taught wisdom, some protected, some observed, and a few rebelled. According to Enoch's accounts, the early Earth was a place where boundaries between dimensions were fluid. The spiritual and the physical overlapped. Heavenly beings could descend, humans could ascend. Communication between realms was not a miracle, but a part of existence. This is where Enoch enters the story, not as a king or warrior, but as a man who was different from the rest of humanity. Ancient sources describe him as unusually perceptive, deeply attuned to the rhythms of creation. He understood the movement of stars, the cycles of seasons, the hidden language of nature. Some traditions even claim he could see into the invisible world, perceiving the presence of angels and the shadows of darker forces. But Enoch's life unfolded during a time of growing tension, when something was beginning to collapse within the fabric of creation. Whispers spoke of celestial beings who abandoned their posts, of forbidden unions between spiritual and human beings, of secret knowledge passed down that corrupted the hearts of men. Violence and bloodshed increased. Nature itself seemed to cry out under the weight of this corruption. In this environment,
Enoch became a witness, and eventually an intermediary. Ancient records say he received visions so overwhelming that he trembled for weeks. He heard voices from realms unseen. He was shown the consequences of celestial rebellion and human arrogance, and he was commanded to write everything down. One of the most mysterious aspects of Enoch's story is his sudden removal from the earth. Unlike every other patriarch whose age and death are recorded, Enoch simply vanishes from the genealogical record. To the early Hebrews, this was a sign that he had been taken into the divine realm, transformed into something more than human. Later traditions, especially those preserved in ancient Ethiopian texts, describe Enoch being carried by wings of fire, escorted by angels through layers of the heavens. He sees crystalline palaces, cosmic storehouses, chambers of judgment, and the great throne of the Most High. He learns the names and duties of the archangels. He witnesses the destiny of humanity. He is shown the end of the age, and through all of this, he is commanded to record what he sees for future generations. But here lies the problem, the reason his writings became forbidden. Enoch describes the universe with such detail that later religious authorities feared people would misunderstand or misinterpret the cosmic secrets. The Book of Enoch reveals how angels fell, how forbidden knowledge corrupted mankind, how hybrid giants devastated the early world, how the flood was not merely a punishment but a cleansing of cosmic imbalance, and how future judgments will unfold. In the canonical scriptures, these themes appear only as fragments, hinted at but never fully explained. But in Enoch's writings, they are explicit, detailed, uncomfortably revealing. And so, throughout history, powerful groups tried to silence the book. It vanished from Jewish scripture. Early Christian councils banned it. In some regions, possessing it was considered heresy. Yet it survived, protected in remote Ethiopian monasteries for nearly 2,000 years. Today, with the rediscovery of ancient manuscripts and the translation of the Ethiopian text, we can finally re-examine this long-lost narrative. But doing so requires us to step into the mindset of ancient people who saw the world not as a closed system, but as a living tapestry woven between heaven and earth. Enoch's story reminds us of a time when humanity believed the divine was not distant, when the sky was not empty, when the spiritual world was as real and present as the breath in one's lungs. This documentary will guide you through that world, through the descent of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, the corruption of creation, and the cosmic justice that followed. Through Enoch's ascent into the heavens, his visions of eternity, and his warnings for the final age of mankind. Whether you see this as myth, lost history, or spiritual revelation, one thing is certain: Enoch is not just a forgotten prophet. He is a key to understanding one of the oldest mysteries on earth, the link between humanity, the heavens, and the realms beyond.
Long before the world was divided into nations, before kingdoms rose on the banks of rivers, there existed a time when the sky itself seemed alive with motion and intention. The stars were more than distant lights. They were sentinels, beings of immense power, watching over creation. And among them were a class of celestial entities known as the Watchers, angels who had been tasked with guiding humanity, teaching wisdom, and maintaining the order of the earth. Yet according to the ancient writings preserved in the Book of Enoch, these Watchers did not remain obedient. Their story is one of fascination, betrayal, and cosmic consequences that reverberated through generations of humans,
shaping the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. The Watchers were not merely abstract symbols. In the worldview of early civilizations, they were real beings, immortal, yet bound to the cosmic law. They were the custodians of knowledge, guardians of science before the word existed, bearers of astronomy, mathematics, the hidden properties of plants and animals, the cycles of the moon, the stars, and the seasons. They were entrusted with the sacred task of teaching humanity to understand the world without causing imbalance. For countless years, the earth flourished under their guidance, and humans thrived, learning slowly the secrets of agriculture, craftsmanship, and medicine. But as the Book of Enoch recounts, something extraordinary and forbidden happened. Some of the Watchers, moved by curiosity, desire, or perhaps envy of human potential, decided to descend to earth and live among humans. They crossed the boundaries set by divine law, breaking the cosmic balance, and the consequences were catastrophic. These angels, known as the Grigori in some texts, introduced knowledge that was not meant for mankind. The secrets of metallurgy, the crafting of weapons, the use of cosmetics, enchantments, and astrology, not as tools for survival, but as instruments of power and domination. They taught humans how to manipulate nature in ways that were previously reserved for the divine. Some of the early kings and rulers, seduced by this forbidden wisdom, used it to consolidate power, build enormous monuments, and wage wars that reshaped the land. Civilization advanced, but at a steep cost: the corruption of the human heart and the imbalance of the natural order. The most infamous act of these Watchers, however, was their union with human women. From these unions came a race of giants known as the Nephilim, beings of immense strength, insatiable appetite, and destructive tendencies. The texts describe them as colossal, often reaching unimaginable heights, consuming enormous quantities of food, and wreaking havoc across human settlements. Their presence was not only a physical threat, but a spiritual one. They were embodiments of the unnatural mingling of divine power with human mortality, living examples of what happens when the natural order is violated. Enoch, as the chosen mediator between humanity and the divine, bore witness to these events. Unlike other humans, he could perceive the true nature of these angels, their motives, and the damage they were inflicting. He saw how they corrupted not only humanity, but the very essence of creation. Their actions angered the heavenly authorities, for they undermined the law and the careful design of the cosmos. What is remarkable about Enoch's role is his courage and dedication. While others were terrified or seduced by the Watchers, he confronted them. He recorded their deeds, naming each one individually, and described in vivid detail their sins and their punishments. According to Enoch, he was instructed by God to warn these angels of the judgment that awaited them, to ensure that their transgressions would not go unpunished. He became the voice of cosmic justice in a time when the world was spiraling toward chaos. The Book of Enoch contains elaborate descriptions of the heavens, the firmaments, and the celestial prisons prepared for the Watchers. Some were bound in chains, cast into dark pits beneath the earth, awaiting the final judgment. Others were condemned to observe from a distance, forced to witness the suffering they had caused. The text describes a level of detail that suggests a complex cosmology, one in which angels, humans, and the natural world are interconnected in ways modern science is only beginning to appreciate. The ancient authors understood the concept of cause and effect on a scale that went beyond human history. They saw morality, justice, and cosmic law intertwined. Observing these patterns, Enoch warns that humanity must learn to live in harmony with cosmic law or face catastrophe. As we read Enoch today, it is impossible not to be struck by the relevance of his warnings. The narrative of the Watchers resonates not only as ancient mythology, but as a metaphor for the contemporary world, where human curiosity and innovation constantly test ethical boundaries, where knowledge is often acquired faster than the wisdom to use it responsibly. The story serves as a reminder that intelligence alone is not enough. Morality, restraint, and awareness of consequences are essential for the survival and flourishing of civilization. Finally, it is crucial to understand that Enoch's visions of the Watchers are not merely about punishment. They also reveal a divine plan of redemption. Despite the chaos, despite the corruption, there is a pathway toward restoration. The narrative emphasizes that cosmic law is not arbitrary, but designed to maintain balance, that transgression can be rectified, and that humanity, guided by wisdom and insight, can recover and thrive. Enoch himself becomes a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the possibility of bridging divides between human limitations and the vast mysteries of creation. In essence, the Watcher's story is a cautionary tale, a cosmic drama, and a source of profound insight into the human condition. Through Enoch, we learn about the fragility of order, the allure of forbidden knowledge, and the power of vigilance, courage, and wisdom. The text compels us to ask difficult questions. How do we navigate the tension between curiosity and ethical responsibility? How do we recognize and resist influences that may lead us astray? And ultimately, how do we reconcile human ambition with the greater laws that govern existence? As we conclude this chapter, it becomes clear that the events surrounding the Watchers were not isolated. They set the stage for the major upheavals that follow in Enoch's narrative: the emergence of giants, the corruption of the earth, and the preparation for a cataclysm that would reshape human history. The Watchers' rebellion is the beginning of a chain reaction, the first disruption in a delicate system, and the start of a story that will challenge our understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos.
Once the Watchers descended and mingled with humanity, the consequences were swift and transformative. The forbidden unions brought forth the Nephilim, beings of extraordinary size, power, and ambition. They were not mere giants. They were entities that blurred the line between the divine and human, combining the strength of the angels with the instincts and desires of mortals. These beings, described in Enoch's visions and echoed in various ancient texts, became the dominant force on the earth, reshaping landscapes, social structures, and even the spiritual equilibrium of humanity. The Nephilim's existence altered the very fabric of early human society. Their immense size and strength allowed them to dominate the territories around early settlements. They could fell trees with a single swing, divert rivers, and construct monumental structures far beyond the capabilities of ordinary humans. Villages and early towns either submitted to their will or were destroyed entirely. This dominance was not just physical, it had psychological and cultural ramifications. Humans who encountered the Nephilim were struck with awe, fear, or veneration. Some communities began worshiping them as gods, attributing their supernatural abilities to divine favor, rather than the unnatural result of angelic human unions. In this way, the Nephilim reshaped belief systems, laying the groundwork for myths of demigods, titans, and heroes that would persist for millennia. But the Nephilim were not merely curious or capricious beings. Enoch emphasizes that they were driven by insatiable appetites, greed for power, lust for control, and an unquenchable hunger that consumed both resources and human lives. Their behavior corrupted human societies, accelerating violence, environmental degradation, and moral decay. Forests were stripped bare, rivers polluted, and fertile lands overexploited.
Enoch's texts suggest that the Nephilim's actions contributed directly to what he describes as a corruption of the earth, a process that would culminate in the Great Flood. They disrupted the delicate balance that had allowed humans and nature to coexist, and their presence marked a turning point in the history of the planet. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Nephilim is how they influenced human knowledge and culture. While the Watchers had introduced forbidden knowledge with a degree of instruction, the Nephilim applied this knowledge recklessly. They taught humans to forge weapons, manipulate elements for construction, and even practice dark forms of divination and enchantment. These lessons were not meant to elevate humanity, but to create tools for domination and self-indulgence. Human communities that had once thrived on cooperation and sustainable practices now turned toward hierarchy, warfare, and exploitation. The Nephilim became both teachers and tyrants, shaping a civilization built on fear, awe, and the accumulation of power. The spiritual impact was profound. According to Enoch, humanity's moral compass became warped under the influence of these hybrids. Concepts of right and wrong, once grounded in observation of nature and communal agreement, began to fracture. The Nephilim exemplified the potential for immense power without accountability, illustrating the dangers of strength divorced from wisdom. Entire generations grew up witnessing acts of violence and dominance that were normalized, accepted, or even celebrated. The sacred knowledge brought by the Watchers became a double-edged sword. Tools for learning had become instruments of corruption. Enoch's vision also conveys that the earth itself was affected. Animals, too, were corrupted, either through the Nephilim's experiments or through the disruption of natural systems. Predators grew larger, prey species declined, and ecosystems became unbalanced. Floods, droughts, and other natural disasters became more frequent, though they were amplified by the unnatural activity of the giants. The text suggests a chain reaction. The introduction of forbidden knowledge leads to misuse, which in turn results in ecological imbalance, which in turn accelerates human conflict and suffering. In this way, Enoch's narrative anticipates modern concerns about technology, ethics, and environmental stewardship, albeit framed in mythic language. Despite the overwhelming chaos, Enoch did not despair. He observed, recorded, and acted as a messenger. He documented the names of the leaders among the Nephilim, their deeds, and the warnings given by the divine. His accounts make it clear that the Nephilim were aware of the limits they were breaking, yet hubris blinded them. This hubris, self-assured arrogance and disregard for cosmic law, would become their undoing. Enoch describes how the heavens themselves responded to this imbalance. Divine judgment was prepared, not out of vengeance, but to restore equilibrium to the earth and to ensure that humanity could survive and learn from these lessons. The story of the Nephilim is also a story about lineage and legacy. Though many were destroyed in the flood and other purges, fragments of their influence remained embedded in human culture. Some myths of heroic figures, warriors, kings, and giants in various traditions may have roots in these early narratives. Architectural achievements, social hierarchies, and technological innovations could carry echoes of knowledge initially introduced by the Watchers and applied by the Nephilim. As if humanity inherited both a gift and a curse, the brilliance of knowledge coupled with the danger of misusing it. Every step forward in civilization might have carried with it a shadow of these ancient transgressions, shaping the path of progress and conflict alike. The psychological impact on humans cannot be overstated. Societies were forced to confront forces beyond their comprehension. Leaders and shamans emerged claiming insight into the mysteries of the giants in the heavens, some offering guidance, others exploiting fear. Rituals, sacrifices, and complex social systems arose to cope with the influence of beings who were both teachers and tyrants. In a sense, the Nephilim accelerated the development of human culture, not in peaceful, evolutionary increments, but through pressure, fear, and necessity. Humanity adapted, learning to navigate the presence of beings vastly superior in strength and knowledge, and in doing so, they developed resilience, cunning, and ingenuity. One cannot overlook the symbolic meaning of the Nephilim as well. Beyond their physical presence, they represent the consequences of transgression, crossing natural, moral, or cosmic boundaries. Their story serves as a warning about the seductive power of knowledge when divorced from responsibility. In modern terms, it's an allegory for the dangers of technologies that humans are not ready to wield, for systems of power that are unchecked, and for the moral consequences of ignoring the balance of the world around us. It is striking that texts written thousands of years ago would emphasize themes so relevant today, suggesting a deep understanding of human nature and the cycles of civilization. Enoch's writings insist that this corruption was not permanent. Though the Nephilim wrought havoc and introduced fear and moral confusion, the divine plan included restoration. The flood, as described in later texts, was a mechanism to cleanse the earth, remove the giants, and allow humanity a fresh start. It underscores a recurring theme in ancient narratives, that cosmic law and balance are ultimately restorative, even if the means are harsh and incomprehensible to those living through the events. The Nephilim's story is therefore a story of warning, observation, and ultimately, the possibility of redemption.
Before humanity had ever encountered the Nephilim, the earth was already on the cusp of transformation. The Watchers, celestial beings tasked with observing humanity, saw the potential in human beings and, for reasons that remain debated, chose to intervene. Unlike later angelic messengers who delivered wisdom through divine decree, the Watchers imparted knowledge directly, crossing boundaries that were meant to remain inviolate. What they taught was not mere survival skills or the rudiments of agriculture. They brought secrets that, according to Enoch, humanity was not yet ready to wield. They revealed arts and sciences that could alter the course of civilization: metallurgy, weapon forging, astrology, enchantments, and even forms of divination and celestial observation that could predict events far beyond human comprehension. The knowledge the Watchers provided was seductive and dangerous. It promised power, insight, and control over natural forces, yet it came with consequences that would ripple across generations. Weapons became more than tools; they became instruments of domination. Metals could be forged into shapes humans had never imagined, giving rise to tools and instruments that shifted the balance of daily life. Skills that might have once allowed humans to survive in small communities now allowed certain individuals to assert control over others, creating hierarchies, feuds, and systems of influence that did not exist before. The teachings of the Watchers accelerated societal complexity, but also seeded the potential for conflict and corruption. One of the most profound legacies of the Watchers was in their instruction on astrology and celestial knowledge. They showed humans how to observe the heavens, track the movements of stars and planets, and interpret patterns in ways that suggested both cycles and prophecy. For the first time, humans could attempt to understand the rhythms of the earth in relation to the cosmos. Agricultural cycles could be predicted, migratory patterns of animals anticipated, and seasons understood with unprecedented accuracy. Yet with this knowledge came hubris. Humans began to believe they could manipulate the world according to their understanding, rather than live in harmony with it. The line between insight and control blurred, and the seeds of overreach were planted. Alongside this celestial instruction came knowledge of metals and weapons, which Enoch describes in chilling detail. Swords, armor, and tools of war became more sophisticated, and with each advancement, human violence intensified. Before the Watchers' teachings, conflicts were localized in small scale, Afterward, humans had the means of waging battles that could reshape entire regions. The giants, products of the unions between Watchers and humans, were the most immediate beneficiaries of these skills, applying them with devastating effect. Yet even ordinary humans who mastered these crafts could rise to positions of influence, altering the political and social landscapes in ways that would have lasting consequences. Knowledge that could have been a gift for survival became a mechanism for domination and fear. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Watchers' influence was their instruction in forbidden arts, enchantments, magic, and the manipulation of natural forces in ways that went against divine law. These teachings were not merely theoretical, they were applied. Enoch warns that humans began to summon spirits, invoke powers beyond their comprehension, and experiment with forces that could disrupt the natural order. Some tribes embraced these arts, seeking advantage over rivals, while others recoiled, fearful of the consequences. Yet the very existence of this knowledge meant that it could not be undone. The moral and spiritual corruption introduced by these practices would echo for generations, shaping societies and ethical frameworks in ways both subtle and profound. The transmission of this knowledge also created a divide between human groups. Those who learned from the Watchers gained abilities and insights that set them apart from others, establishing the first forms of social stratification based on understanding and access to power. Communities were no longer uniform in their capabilities or in their worldview. Rivalries deepened and mistrust grew. Legends speak of secret teachings passed down through select lineages, knowledge kept hidden and protected, ensuring that the balance of power remained skewed. In some ways, these early knowledge hierarchies foreshadowed the development of priestly classes, guilds, and esoteric schools that would emerge much later in human history. Yet the Watchers did not simply teach humans for the sake of domination or control. There is evidence in Enoch's writings that some teachings were intended to elevate human understanding, to allow early humans to observe the world with sophistication and depth previously unattainable. Agriculture, astronomy, and medicine were all touched by this knowledge. The issue was not the knowledge itself, but humanity's readiness to wield it responsibly. Inexperienced, impressionable, and driven by desire, humans often applied these lessons for selfish ends, creating cycles of destruction and corruption that mirrored the chaos introduced by the Nephilim. The tension between potential and misapplication would become a recurring theme in the human story, reflected in myths of hubris, divine punishment, and catastrophic consequences. The impact on human spirituality was immediate and profound. With knowledge came questions that had never been asked before. Who were these beings teaching us? Were they allies or adversaries? How far could human understanding stretch before it became dangerous? Religious thought, ethics, and philosophical frameworks began to emerge in response. Humans had to reconcile the existence of powers far beyond their own with the understanding that some forces were not meant for manipulation. These early spiritual dilemmas, though rooted in myth, reflect timeless human concerns, the responsibilities of knowledge, the temptation of power, and the consequences of overreach. Enoch also emphasizes that the Watchers' actions were monitored by the divine realm. They were aware that these interventions would have consequences, and warnings were issued, yet the celestial beings persisted. This raises a fascinating question about free will, both for humans and angels. The lessons were offered, but the application was entirely dependent on human choice. Humans could embrace wisdom responsibly, or they could succumb to corruption. The narrative underscores the ancient understanding that knowledge in itself is neither inherently good nor evil. It is the choices made in its application that define its moral weight. Interestingly, the legacy of the Watchers is not entirely lost to history. Fragments appear across cultures and continents, often disguised in myth, legend, and ritual. The skills and techniques they introduced were encoded in stories of firebringers, civilizing heroes, and demigods. Architectural marvels, advances in metallurgy, and early astronomy all hint at a repository of knowledge that may have been seeded by these ancient teachers. Yet the full scope of what was imparted and what was lost through misapplication and catastrophe remains one of humanity's greatest mysteries, a testament to the enduring fascination with the intersection of the divine, the forbidden, and the human. Finally, the tale of the Watchers is a profound meditation on responsibility and consequence. It illustrates that knowledge, power, and innovation are not neutral. They carry inherent risks, particularly when wielded without wisdom. It also reinforces a reoccurring theme. Humanity has always been capable of profound achievement, but that capability exists within a framework of ethics, restraint, and awareness. The stories of the Watchers and their forbidden knowledge remind us that even the most extraordinary gifts must be approached with caution, humility, and foresight. They serve as a mirror to contemporary challenges, from technology to ecological stewardship, illustrating that lessons from the past are far from irrelevant. As we reflect on the Watchers' gifts and transgressions, it becomes evident that human history is not simply a progression from ignorance to knowledge. Rather, it is a complex dance of discovery, misuse, adaptation, and learning. The Watchers set the stage for a pivotal chapter in the human story, a chapter marked by ambition, innovation, and moral challenge. Humanity's encounter with these beings shaped not only physical civilization, but also the evolution of thought, morality, and spiritual awareness. The consequences of their teachings echo across time, inviting each generation to grapple with the same questions. How do we use the knowledge we acquire? At what point does curiosity become hubris? And how do we balance ambition with responsibility? Ultimately, the Watchers' legacy is a dual one. They expanded the horizon of human potential, while simultaneously revealing the dangers inherent in that potential. Their story underscores the timeless tension between enlightenment and corruption, between the gift of knowledge and the peril of misuse. In this tension, humanity's story unfolds, a story of challenge, resilience, creativity, and moral struggle. And as we continue to explore our past, the echoes of the Watchers remind us that every discovery, every leap forward, carries with it a responsibility that transcends time, urging us to approach the unknown with both courage and foresight.
As the echoes of the Watchers' teachings spread across the earth, humanity began to stand at a precipice. They had inherited knowledge that could transform their world, yet they had not inherited the wisdom to manage it fully. This period, stretching across centuries, was one of both unprecedented innovation and profound vulnerability. The earth itself was a restless stage, and humanity, though capable of remarkable ingenuity, was still subject to forces far beyond its control. Climate shifts, geological events, and environmental instability were all silently shaping the fate of civilizations long before written records could capture their stories. The Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near-glacial conditions, struck at precisely this fragile moment, and the consequences would be catastrophic. The Younger Dryas was no ordinary climate fluctuation. It lasted roughly 1,300 years, an era of abrupt cooling, intensified storms, and shifting ecosystems. For hunter-gatherer communities, it meant that traditional food sources became scarce or disappeared entirely. Animals that had been dependable sources of sustenance, mammoths, mastodons, horses, camels, and giant ground sloths, vanished across vast regions. Human populations that had thrived for generations suddenly found themselves facing starvation, unpredictable weather, and environmental pressures that their accumulated knowledge could not fully mitigate. Communities were forced to migrate, fragment, and adapt in ways that fundamentally altered social structures. Some groups vanished from the archaeological record entirely, leaving only traces of their existence in the form of scattered tools, abandoned camps, and mysterious artifacts. It is essential to understand that this was not a gradual decline. The Younger Dryas struck with sudden ferocity. Temperatures plummeted, ice sheets expanded, and the rhythms of nature that human survival had depended upon were thrown into chaos. Rivers froze in places that had once flowed freely. Forests receded, and grasslands became barren. Humans, like their prey, were forced into rapid adaptation or faced extinction. In some regions, entire species of animals disappeared almost overnight. The loss of megafauna was not merely a matter of missing meals. It undermined trade,
cultural practices, and spiritual systems deeply intertwined with the natural world. Humans had relied on these creatures not just for food, but for clothing, tools, and symbolic meaning. Their disappearance rippled through human societies like a shockwave, disrupting everything from hunting strategies to religious rituals. Amid this environmental upheaval, humans faced a second, equally destabilizing challenge: social collapse. The intricate networks of knowledge, trade, and cultural practice that had allowed groups to thrive were severely disrupted. The Clovis culture in North America, for example, which had spread across the continent with remarkable sophistication, vanished almost entirely. Archaeologists can trace the disappearance of their distinctive tool technology to the onset of the Younger Dryas. This was not a story of human extinction, people survived, but of cultural collapse. Systems of knowledge, from hunting techniques to communal governance, were fragmented or lost entirely. What emerged after the Younger Dryas were simpler societies, forced to rebuild from the remnants of their ancestors' ingenuity. It was, in essence, a reset, a rare and brutal interruption in human history. Globally, this pattern repeated itself. In Europe, Asia, and Africa, civilizations that had developed complex social structures before 12,800 years ago experienced similar collapses. Sophisticated hunter-gatherer societies were disrupted, knowledge disappeared, and simpler cultural forms reappeared in the archaeological record after the climate stabilized around 11,600 years ago. This gap, the archaeological void, represents one of the most profound historical blind spots. It is a period in which humanity had already demonstrated intelligence, adaptability, and creativity, yet our ability to trace that complexity is severely limited. We are left to reconstruct their world through fragmented tools, scattered remains, and indirect evidence, trying to imagine what knowledge may have been lost, what technologies may have been forgotten, and what social systems may have vanished. The catastrophe of the Younger Dryas was not only physical but also psychological. Communities that survived endured stress, displacement, and trauma on a generational scale. Oral histories, passed from elders to youth, may have preserved fragments of experience, but the cultural continuity that allows knowledge to accumulate was deeply fractured. We must consider that these societies were not primitive in the sense often implied by modern assumptions. On the contrary, they were highly intelligent, resourceful, and capable of sophisticated planning. Their collapse reflects the overwhelming power of environmental forces rather than a deficiency in human capability. Yet for the survivors, every choice carried enormous consequences, and mistakes could be fatal. In addition to environmental and social pressures, the Younger Dryas likely accelerated technological experimentation and innovation, albeit in chaotic ways. Some groups may have developed new hunting strategies, food storage techniques, or tool adaptations in response to scarcity. Others may have turned to ritualized behavior or esoteric knowledge as a means of coping with uncertainty and asserting control over an unpredictable world. This period was thus both destructive and formative. While much was lost, the survivors carried forward innovations that would shape post-Younger Dryas societies. Humanity's resilience during this era demonstrates a remarkable capacity for adaptation, improvisation, and survival under extreme conditions. These are the traits that allowed the eventual emergence of complex civilizations such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, built on foundations laid by ancestors who had endured the harshest climate catastrophe of the last 100,000 years. The Younger Dryas also had profound ecological consequences, which in turn influenced human behavior. As glaciers retreated, ecosystems were reshaped. Wetlands, lakes, and rivers shifted, forcing migration and reshaping subsistence strategies. The loss of megafauna not only affected human diets, but also altered landscapes, as these animals had played critical roles in seed dispersal, soil aeration, and the maintenance of ecological balance. Humans were forced to innovate in response. The domestication of smaller animals,
the cultivation of wild plants, and eventually the development of agriculture can be seen as long-term responses to these pressures. The seeds of settled civilization, then, may owe much to this period of intense environmental disruption. Yet for all its devastation, the Younger Dryas is also a story of human ingenuity and continuity. Communities survived, knowledge adapted, and cultural memory persisted. The ancestors who emerged from this dark period carried with them fragments of lost wisdom, insights encoded in tools, oral traditions, and symbolic practices. Some of this knowledge may have been lost entirely, while other aspects were preserved, recombined, and eventually contributed to the rise of early urban civilizations. In this sense, the Younger Dryas is not only a story of destruction, but also a testament to human resilience and the capacity to rebuild in the face of overwhelming adversity. Finally, the Younger Dryas serves as a reminder of the limits of certainty in historical research. The gaps in the archaeological record are opportunities to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to explore possibilities. What technologies did humans lose? What knowledge about the environment, astronomy, or medicine disappeared? How did these catastrophes shape human psychology, social organization, and spiritual thought? Every fragment we uncover is a clue, and every unanswered question is a doorway into a deeper understanding of our collective past. The void left by the Younger Dryas is not just a period of absence, it is a space of potential discovery, urging us to look beyond the obvious, to question the assumed timeline, and to recognize the resilience and creativity that define humanity. In examining the Younger Dryas, we confront both the vulnerability and the ingenuity of our species. It is a period that reminds us that even the most intelligent, resourceful societies are at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Yet it also demonstrates that knowledge, adaptability, and human creativity can endure, survive, and ultimately flourish even after profound disruption. The survivors of this era laid the foundations for all subsequent civilization, inheriting both the losses and the fragments of wisdom that had survived. And in studying this epoch, we are reminded that the story of humanity is neither linear nor predictable. It is a story of resilience, curiosity, and the ongoing quest to understand our place in a complex and often unforgiving world.
When we look back at human history, there is a clear pattern: periods of remarkable achievement followed by sudden disappearances or collapses, leaving gaps in our understanding. These voids are more than just empty spaces in the archaeological record. They are reminders of what we have lost, what remains buried, and how fragile the continuity of knowledge can be. Among these gaps, the period surrounding the Younger Dryas, roughly 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, stands out as one of the most dramatic. It was a time when human innovation, cultural complexity, and social networks were interrupted, in many cases disappearing entirely, only to resurface centuries or millennia later in altered forms. The notion of lost civilizations can be difficult for the modern mind to grasp because we tend to think in linear terms. Civilizations rise, flourish, decline, and leave clear traces for us to study. Yet, pre-Younger Dryas societies challenged this view. These communities had developed extensive networks, sophisticated toolkits, and complex social structures, evidence of long-term cultural evolution. Archaeological findings suggest that they had mastered hunting techniques, environmental management, and possibly early symbolic systems. Tools were designed with precision, settlements were strategically located, and some evidence points to organized trade and knowledge transmission across vast distances. Then, almost abruptly, this entire framework was disrupted, leaving us with fragments that are tantalizing but incomplete. Consider the Americas before the Younger Dryas. The Clovis culture, known for its distinctive fluted projectile points, spanned thousands of miles across North America. The precision and uniformity of these tools suggest a shared technological and social knowledge that allowed communities to thrive in diverse environments. And yet, around 12,800 years ago, this culture vanishes. Tools stop appearing, settlements are abandoned, and the archaeological record enters a period of silence. Were these people killed off, forced to migrate, or did they reorganize in ways that left minimal traces? We may never know for certain. What is evident is that something significant was lost, a body of practical knowledge, cultural norms, and social structures that enabled humans to exist in harmony with the challenging landscapes of the time. Across the globe, similar patterns emerge. In Europe, complex hunter-gatherer societies with extensive networks of cave art, ritualized burial practices, and sophisticated hunting strategies faced environmental stressors that disrupted their continuity. In Africa, the cradle of human civilization, evidence of early technological development, such as tool innovation and social organization, shows abrupt changes during periods of climate fluctuation. Even in Asia and Oceania, human populations had established intricate systems of resource management and knowledge transmission, which were interrupted or erased by environmental challenges. The Younger Dryas was not simply a regional event. It was a catalyst for widespread cultural disruption, creating historical voids that continue to puzzle archaeologists and historians alike. These gaps are not merely absences of material culture, they are absences of knowledge, of lived experience, and of insight into how humans understood their world. We can see the material remnants, tools, pottery fragments, traces of dwellings, but what about the intangible aspects of civilization? Oral traditions, early mathematics, systems of astronomical observation, and symbolic communication likely existed long before written records. If even a portion of this knowledge was lost, the consequences are profound. Each lost generation represents thousands of hours of observation, experimentation, and learning erased from the historical record. The collapse of societies during the Younger Dryas thus represents not just a loss of life, but a massive disruption in the accumulation and transmission of human understanding. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that some pre-Younger Dryas civilizations may have possessed forms of knowledge that we cannot yet comprehend. Astronomical observations, for instance, might have been far more advanced than we assume. By tracking the stars, the sun, and the moon over generations, ancient humans could have developed calendars, predicted seasonal changes, and coordinated agricultural or hunting practices with remarkable accuracy. Mathematical concepts may have been encoded in rituals, structures, or symbolic objects preserved in ways that do not survive the passage of time. Even early forms of symbolic writing or proto-writing may have existed, leaving no trace that modern archaeologists can currently identify. The gap left by the Younger Dryas obscures the full extent of human ingenuity during this period. The environmental catastrophe itself may have accelerated both the loss and transformation of knowledge. As communities were forced to migrate, consolidate, or fragment, previously established networks of information transmission were broken. Elders who held critical knowledge may have died, and oral traditions could have been altered or forgotten entirely. At the same time, necessity drove innovation. Humans adapted to new climates, experimented with alternative food sources, and developed strategies for survival under extreme stress. Some of these adaptations may have been retained and integrated into post-Younger Dryas societies, forming the foundation for later technological and cultural developments. This dual process, loss and adaptation, is key to understanding how human civilization navigated this perilous era. It is also essential to recognize the psychological dimension of these events. Societies facing prolonged environmental stress and resource scarcity likely experienced collective trauma, altering social behavior and cultural priorities. Ritual, art, and myth may have evolved as mechanisms for coping, preserving social cohesion, and transmitting essential survival knowledge. Yet these same practices, if not carefully maintained, were vulnerable to interruption. When the Younger Dryas receded and climates stabilized, humans were faced with the challenge of reconstructing their societies. Some knowledge survived intact, some was modified, and some was lost forever. The picture we have today is necessarily incomplete, shaped by both what endured and what disappeared. Modern archaeology is gradually illuminating some of these hidden histories. Advances in technology, LiDAR surveys revealing hidden settlements beneath dense forests, DNA analysis tracing ancient migrations, ice core sampling providing climate data, allow us to reconstruct aspects of these lost civilizations with unprecedented precision. Yet every discovery raises new questions. When we uncover the remains of a settlement, we can analyze its structure, the tools used, and dietary habits. But the intangible elements, belief systems, oral histories, and social hierarchies, remain largely speculative. Each gap in the record is a space for imagination guided by scientific evidence, a reminder that the story of human history is never complete. The gaps left by the Younger Dryas also remind us that civilization is not inevitable. Human societies are deeply resilient, but they are not immune to the forces of nature. The ability to survive catastrophic events depends not only on intelligence, but also on flexibility, social cohesion, and the capacity to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. The lessons of this period are both historical and contemporary. They remind us that environmental disruption can have profound cultural consequences, and that survival often hinges on the ability to innovate under pressure. In many ways, studying these lost civilizations is also a study of human potential, the remarkable ways in which communities can endure, adapt, and eventually rebuild. Finally, the Younger Dryas and the gaps it created challenge us to approach history with humility. Every assumption about early humans being primitive is undermined by evidence of sophisticated toolmaking, social organization, and ecological awareness. The gaps are not mere inconveniences for researchers. They are opportunities to explore human potential in a world shaped by both mastery and vulnerability. They encourage curiosity, critical thinking, and an acknowledgement that our understanding of the past is always provisional. In the fragments we uncover, in the stories that partially survive, we glimpse both the fragility and resilience of the human spirit, a duality that has defined our species from the earliest days to the present. In contemplating the lost knowledge of pre-Younger Dryas civilizations, we also confront the broader question of how history is recorded, preserved, and interpreted. Written records, monuments, and artifacts are only part of the story. The rest exists in the choices, practices, and innovations of people whose lives were interrupted by forces beyond their control.
When the Younger Dryas finally ended around 11,600 years ago, the world did not instantly return to the comfortable stability that had preceded it. Glaciers retreated, temperatures rose, and ecosystems slowly began to recover. But humans who had survived the catastrophic 1,300-year climate event faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding their lives, communities, and knowledge systems. It was a period defined by resilience, adaptation, and the painstaking reconstruction of social and cultural structures that had been disrupted and, in some cases, entirely erased. Understanding how human societies navigated this transitional era is crucial for appreciating both the fragility and the ingenuity of our species. The first challenge was environmental. The Younger Dryas had caused massive shifts in climate patterns, with drastic cooling, changes in precipitation, and fluctuating sea levels.
Areas that had once been rich in game or fertile for plant foraging might have been transformed into inhospitable tundra or wetlands. River systems shifted, coastlines moved, and forests retreated or expanded, forcing human populations to migrate or adjust their subsistence strategies. Survival demanded acute observation, adaptability, and the ability to experiment with new food sources, hunting techniques, and settlement patterns. It was an era in which trial and error often meant the difference between life and death. In addition to environmental pressures, human communities faced social challenges. Networks that had spanned vast regions before the Younger Dryas were disrupted. Trade routes that once connected distant groups might have been destroyed or rendered dangerous. Social hierarchies and knowledge transfer mechanisms may have collapsed. Skills that had been painstakingly developed over generations, from specialized hunting techniques to the management of natural resources, could be lost if individuals carrying that knowledge perished or relocated. Communities had to rebuild not only physically, but also socially and cognitively, reestablishing trust, communication, and shared practices that would form the foundation for new societal growth. Archaeological evidence from the post-Younger Dryas period shows remarkable examples of human ingenuity and adaptation. Across the globe, we observe the emergence of more complex settlements, sophisticated toolkits, and innovations in food production. In the Fertile Crescent, early experiments with domestication of plants and animals began to take hold. These communities learned to cultivate grains such as wheat and barley, and to manage herds of goats, sheep, and cattle, laying the groundwork for what would become the first agricultural societies. In North America, sites that had been abandoned during the Younger Dryas were reoccupied, sometimes with new technologies and strategies for exploiting local resources. Similar patterns occurred in Asia, Europe, and Africa, illustrating a global trend of human resilience and ingenuity in the face of environmental upheaval. One fascinating aspect of this rebuilding phase is the evidence of knowledge continuity despite the catastrophic disruption. While entire social systems and traditions may have collapsed, some information survived, often in modified forms. For instance, certain tool-making techniques persisted across regions, suggesting that humans retained critical problem-solving skills even when broader cultural frameworks were lost. Likewise, oral traditions may have preserved fragments of ecological knowledge, migratory patterns of animals, or astronomical observations, enabling post-Younger Dryas societies to benefit from the wisdom of their predecessors. These surviving elements of knowledge were essential in helping humans stabilize their societies and innovate further. At the same time, new ideas and adaptations emerged. The trauma and necessity of survival during the Younger Dryas may have accelerated creative problem-solving, leading to technological and cultural innovations. For example, the development of more durable storage methods for grains and other resources allowed communities to survive periods of scarcity more effectively. Tools became increasingly specialized, reflecting both the environmental challenges and the ingenuity of their makers. Social structures evolved, sometimes becoming more hierarchical or cooperative, depending on local conditions and the pressures faced by communities. These adaptations highlight the dynamic interplay between environmental challenges, human ingenuity, and social evolution. The post-Younger Dryas era also marks the beginning of what some archaeologists call the Neolithic Revolution, a period in which humans transitioned from predominantly hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural societies. This transition was not uniform or instantaneous. It occurred over millennia and in multiple regions independently. But the knowledge and strategies developed during this rebuilding phase were foundational. Communities had to learn not only how to grow and store food, but also how to coordinate labor, manage water resources, and establish long-term settlements. These challenges required both practical skills and abstract thinking,
suggesting that humans possessed cognitive capacities far beyond what simple subsistence activities might imply. One cannot overlook the role of memory, tradition, and the transmission of knowledge in this process. While the Younger Dryas disrupted many forms of cultural continuity, it is likely that survivors carried with them both tangible skills and intangible wisdom. Elders, storytellers, and skilled artisans would have been central in passing down what remained, teaching new generations not only practical techniques, but also frameworks for interpreting the world. Symbolic practices, rituals, and early forms of record-keeping may have provided stability, reinforcing social cohesion and helping communities navigate uncertainty. In many ways, the post-Younger Dryas period can be seen as a cultural renaissance, fueled both by the remnants of the past and the pressures of necessity. It is also worth considering the psychological impact of this period on human societies. Experiencing a prolonged environmental catastrophe can leave deep imprints on collective consciousness. Stories, myths, and religious practices may have developed as ways to explain natural phenomena, encode survival knowledge, or maintain social cohesion in the face of trauma. For example, flood myths, creation narratives, and other recurring motifs across disparate cultures may reflect shared experiences of environmental upheaval. Understanding these psychological and cultural dimensions helps us appreciate the complexity of human responses to catastrophic change and provides insight into how societies rebuilt themselves in resilient and innovative ways. Modern archaeology continues to shed light on this period of human resilience. Advanced technologies like LiDAR, satellite imagery, and isotopic analysis allow researchers to reconstruct settlement patterns, dietary habits, and ecological adaptations with unprecedented accuracy. These tools reveal that post-Younger Dryas societies were not simply surviving, they were experimenting, innovating, and laying the foundations for the civilizations that would follow. The evidence challenges outdated assumptions about primitive humans, illustrating instead a species capable of remarkable creativity, strategic thinking, and long-term planning. In essence, the rebuilding period after the Younger Dryas is a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity, a reminder that even in the face of profound disruption, civilizations can not only survive, but thrive. Furthermore, the knowledge accumulated during this period set the stage for the emergence of the first true civilizations. Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Egypt, and other early complex societies did not emerge out of nothing. They were built upon millennia of trial, error, adaptation, and preservation of knowledge. The lessons learned during the Younger Dryas and the subsequent rebuilding phase informed agricultural practices, urban planning, social organization, and trade networks. By studying these transitional societies, we gain insight not only into the past, but also into the enduring mechanisms of human resilience and innovation. Finally, reflecting on this era invites a broader perspective on the human story. The Younger Dryas reminds us that progress is not linear and that civilizations are vulnerable to forces beyond their control. Yet, it also demonstrates that human ingenuity, cooperation, and persistence are powerful forces for survival and renewal. The survivors of this catastrophe were the foundation of future societies, the carriers of both old wisdom and new ideas. Their experiences are a testament to the strength of human adaptability, the importance of preserving and transmitting knowledge, and the resilience inherent in our species. In conclusion, the period following the Younger Dryas offers a powerful lesson in human resilience. Faced with environmental upheaval, social disruption, and the potential loss of accumulated knowledge, human societies not only survived, but began to reconstruct complex and enduring civilizations. They adapted.
As we explore the aftermath of the Younger Dryas and the remarkable resilience of human societies, it is impossible to ignore the shadows. The vast stretches of knowledge, culture, and innovation that were irretrievably lost during the 1300-year climate catastrophe. These lost chapters of human history remain tantalizingly out of reach, visible only in fragments, scattered artifacts, and subtle echoes in oral traditions. Understanding the magnitude of what might have been lost is not only a matter of curiosity, it is essential for appreciating the full scope of human potential and the fragility of civilization in the face of environmental and social upheaval. The Younger Dryas, as a global event, acted as both a destructive force and a filter. Species, both human and animal, that had survived multiple previous climate fluctuations were suddenly unable to endure the abrupt cooling and ecological chaos. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, giant ground sloths, and many others disappeared forever, altering ecosystems irreversibly. Similarly, human societies, most notably the Clovis culture in North America, saw their established social networks, technological advancements, and cultural practices disrupted or obliterated. The Clovis people did not vanish entirely, but their distinct culture, identifiable through its unique tool technology, disappeared. What survived were fragmented communities forced to rebuild from scratch, often without the accumulated knowledge that had previously enabled them to thrive. This pattern was not confined to North America. Across the globe, we observe evidence of cultural resets following the Younger Dryas. Archaeologists note a gap in the material record, an abrupt disappearance of sophisticated artifacts, long-distance trade networks, and monumental constructions, followed by the re-emergence of simpler cultures once environmental stability returned. In Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, societies that had developed complex subsistence strategies, ceremonial practices, or proto-urban settlements experienced disruptions, sometimes catastrophic enough to erase centuries of accumulated wisdom. The consequences are profound. We are left with a historical void, a missing segment in the narrative of human development. Speculating on what was lost is both fascinating and humbling. Consider the intellectual and technological achievements that may have existed before the Younger Dryas. Human societies at the time were capable of extraordinary feats, carefully planned seasonal migrations, sophisticated hunting strategies, ecological management, and even early forms of symbolic expression or proto-writing. Knowledge of astronomy, for instance, could have been far more advanced than we currently appreciate. By observing celestial movements over generations, humans may have developed mathematical frameworks capable of predicting seasonal shifts, celestial events, and environmental changes, an understanding potentially lost during the Younger Dryas. This lost knowledge could have informed agriculture, navigation, and social organization for generations, yet the evidence was likely destroyed or buried under layers of sediment and rising seas. Oral traditions may have played a critical role in preserving fragments of lost knowledge. Even in the absence of written records, stories, myths, and rituals can encode ecological, astronomical, and social information. The challenge is that oral traditions are vulnerable. When populations are dispersed, communities collapse, or elders die without transmitting their knowledge, these intangible records can vanish. It is likely that the survivors of the Younger Dryas retained fragments of older wisdom, but much, potentially the majority, was lost. We are left to reconstruct what we can from the archaeological record, recognizing that what survives is only a partial and imperfect reflection of the past. The most striking consequence of this lost knowledge is the delay it imposed on the development of civilization. While the Neolithic Revolution eventually unfolded independently in several regions, the gap in knowledge transmission may have slowed or altered its trajectory. Techniques for agriculture, animal domestication, settlement construction, and social organization likely had to be relearned or reinvented. Some innovations may have been delayed by centuries or even millennia, while others were permanently lost. This represents a kind of historical blind spot, a period where humanity's potential was obscured by environmental catastrophe and cultural collapse. Yet the loss was not total. Certain technologies, practices, and adaptive strategies persisted. Tool-making skills, for instance, survived in modified forms, demonstrating that human ingenuity could endure even in the face of extreme disruption. Survivors adapted to new environments, experimented with available resources, and developed new social strategies to maintain cohesion and ensure survival. These adaptive skills laid the foundation for the eventual reemergence of complex societies. In a sense, humanity's survival through the Younger Dryas can be seen as a combination of preservation, adaptation, and innovation, a testament to resilience under pressure. The impact of lost knowledge also extends to the symbolic and cultural realms. Early humans likely had a sophisticated understanding of their environment, reflected in art, ritual, and social organization. Monumental structures, ceremonial sites, and intricate carvings suggest that humans possessed not only practical intelligence, but also abstract thinking, creativity, and a desire to record their experiences symbolically. If these cultural expressions were disrupted or destroyed, entire frameworks for understanding the world may have vanished. Modern scholars can only glimpse these lost traditions through scattered artifacts, stone tools, and the occasional cave painting, piecing together a story that is necessarily incomplete. Interestingly, the gaps left by lost knowledge create opportunities for discovery and reinterpretation. Every fragment that survives, whether a tool, a settlement, or a ceremonial site, offers clues about what might have been. Modern technology is revolutionizing our ability to explore these shadows. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, satellite imagery, DNA analysis, and ice core sampling allow archaeologists to uncover previously hidden sites, trace migrations, and reconstruct environmental conditions with unprecedented precision. Each discovery reshapes our understanding of human history, reminding us that what we consider lost may only be temporarily hidden. There is a profound excitement in knowing that entire civilizations, once thought to be primitive or non-existent, are being revealed through these technological breakthroughs. This rediscovery process underscores the importance of curiosity and humility in historical study. There is a tendency to assume linear progress in human development, imagining that modern societies are the inevitable outcome of a steady accumulation of knowledge. The Younger Dryas challenges this narrative, showing that progress is fragile, contingent, and subject to sudden reversals. Societies can rise and fall, technological knowledge can be lost, and entire cultures can vanish from the archaeological record. Recognizing this fragility encourages a more nuanced view of human history, one that values adaptability, resilience, and the interplay between environment, culture, and innovation. The lessons of lost knowledge are not purely historical. They resonate with contemporary challenges. Today, humanity faces global environmental change, resource pressures, and technological disruptions that echo the uncertainties of the Younger Dryas. Understanding how our ancestors navigated catastrophic change provides both inspiration and caution. Their survival depended on observation, experimentation, cooperation, and the ability to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. These are qualities that remain crucial in addressing modern crises, suggesting that the past is not only a record of what was lost, but also a guide for what might be preserved in the future. Finally, contemplating humanity's hidden past invites a broader reflection on the nature of history itself. Much of what we know is reconstructed from fragments, interpreted through the lens of modern assumptions and biases. The gaps, the lost centuries, missing civilizations, and vanished technologies are not simply obstacles. They are spaces of imagination, inquiry, and potential discovery. They remind us that history is not a fixed narrative, but an ongoing investigation, one that benefits from curiosity,
innovation, and interdisciplinary collaboration. Every unanswered question, every missing piece, is an invitation to explore, to hypothesize, and to contribute to our collective understanding of human experience. In conclusion, the shadows of lost knowledge illuminate the complex interplay between catastrophe, survival, and innovation in human history. The Younger Dryas disrupted ecosystems, cultures, and knowledge systems, creating a profound historical void. Yet within that void, humanity persisted, adapted, and ultimately rebuilt societies capable of remarkable achievements. The fragments that survive offer glimpses of lost wisdom.
The end of the Younger Dryas marked not only a shift in climate, but also a turning point in human history. A gradual, painstaking reconstruction of societies and the resurgence of culture after the chaos of millennia. For over 1,000 years, human communities had endured extreme environmental stress, survived through adaptation, and retained fragments of knowledge that would form the foundation for the civilizations to come. Yet the process of rebuilding was neither uniform nor simple. Across the globe, societies faced different challenges, and each region took its own path toward complexity, innovation, and the eventual emergence of early cities. The first challenge after the Younger Dryas was ecological. Glaciers retreated, temperatures stabilized, and new ecosystems emerged, but the world humans returned to was not identical to the one they had left. Megafauna were extinct in many regions, altering food chains and resource availability. Rivers and coastlines had shifted, making previous hunting and gathering grounds obsolete. Forests expanded or receded, and wetlands changed. Humans needed to understand these new landscapes to survive. They had to observe patterns, experiment with planting and harvesting, domesticate animals suitable for the new climate, and learn which plants and animals could sustain communities year-round. This process was slow, iterative, and dependent on local knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge that had survived the collapse. In the Fertile Crescent, the region that would eventually give rise to Mesopotamia, humans were already experimenting with early forms of agriculture. Post-Younger Dryas, these experiments became more intensive. Wheat, barley, and legumes were cultivated systematically, and irrigation techniques began to appear. Small settlements coalesced into proto-villages, and social structures became increasingly complex. Storage facilities emerged, allowing communities to manage surplus and prepare for seasonal fluctuations. This period laid the groundwork for specialization, trade, and the division of labor, critical components of the civilizations that would follow. Yet it is likely that even here, lost knowledge from pre-Younger Dryas societies had to be rediscovered or reinvented, a process both constrained and enabled by what survived in memory, culture, and surviving artifacts. Meanwhile, in the Americas, societies faced similar challenges of adaptation and recovery. The collapse of the Clovis culture left gaps in technological and cultural continuity, but over time, new tool traditions emerged, reflecting both inherited skills and innovative adaptation to changing ecosystems. Human ingenuity ensured that hunter-gatherer societies could transition into more sedentary agricultural communities, cultivating maize, beans, and squash. These innovations were not instantaneous. They required generations of trial and error, observation, and careful management of resources. The resilience of these societies highlights the remarkable capacity for humans to adapt to crises and to rebuild from incomplete knowledge. An essential element of post-Younger Dryas recovery was the preservation of memory and the continuity of social cohesion. Communities that survived likely relied on elder knowledge, oral histories, and ritual to maintain cultural identity. Even fragmented knowledge could guide survival strategies, inform agricultural practices, and maintain social norms. The act of storytelling, teaching, and ceremonial practice became vehicles for retaining essential information across generations. These cultural mechanisms may have compensated, to some degree, for the catastrophic loss of technological or practical knowledge, creating continuity in otherwise disrupted societies. The interplay between memory and innovation was critical. Humans were simultaneously preserving what remained and experimenting to solve new problems presented by an altered world. As societies rebuilt, the emergence of trade networks and regional interaction became increasingly significant. Surviving communities began to exchange goods, knowledge, and techniques over greater distances. Obsidian, flint, shells, and other materials traveled hundreds of miles, indicating not only resource acquisition, but also the transmission of technological and cultural knowledge. These networks facilitated the diffusion of agricultural practices, ceremonial ideas, and social organization. While some knowledge may have been lost in the Younger Dryas, these exchanges accelerated recovery, allowing societies to benefit from innovations developed elsewhere. In essence, human cooperation became a powerful tool for rebuilding civilizations faster than isolated communities could manage on their own. The technological innovations of this period, though primitive compared to later civilizations, were sophisticated in context. Tools were designed for efficiency, materials carefully selected, and production processes adapted to available resources. Pottery emerged as a durable method for storing food and water, while weaving techniques allowed for clothing and shelter construction. Even early symbolic communication, proto-writing, tally marks, and pictograms began to appear, encoding knowledge critical for coordination and trade. These innovations were stepping stones, building on both retained knowledge from the past and creative problem-solving born from necessity. The pattern demonstrates that human innovation is rarely linear. It is iterative, cumulative, and resilient, even when prior knowledge is partially lost. Another fascinating aspect of this recovery was the emergence of ceremonial and symbolic structures. Megalithic constructions, ritual sites, and early communal spaces reflect not only social organization, but also the human desire to understand and communicate with the world in abstract terms. These structures may have encoded astronomical knowledge, cosmological beliefs, or social hierarchies. While the original intellectual frameworks that informed pre-Younger Dryas societies may have been lost, new interpretations emerged, influenced by surviving traditions and environmental observation. In this way, human societies simultaneously preserved fragments of the past and created entirely new cultural expressions. The reconstruction of society was not uniform across the globe. In some regions, recovery was rapid, facilitated by abundant resources and relatively stable environments. In others, harsher climates, fragmented landscapes, or diminished biodiversity made recovery slow and uncertain. These differences explain why some civilizations arose earlier and with greater complexity than others. Yet across all regions, the underlying principle remained the same. Human survival depended on a combination of memory, adaptation, and cooperation. The experience of navigating the post-Younger Dryas world may have strengthened resilience, leading to innovations in governance, resource management, and social cohesion that would support future civilizations. The long-term impact of this period is evident in the foundation of the first cities. Urbanization, centralized administration, and monumental architecture required centuries of incremental development. Surviving knowledge from earlier societies, whether in tool-making, agriculture, or social organization, provided the scaffolding for these achievements. However, we must recognize that much of the pre-Younger Dryas innovation was likely lost forever. What we see in early Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley represents both a continuation of human ingenuity and a reinvention in the absence of the full body of previous knowledge. In other words, civilization as we know it was built on the fragments that survived, the lessons rediscovered, and the creativity born from necessity. Studying this process provides valuable insights into human resilience and the fragility of culture. It reminds us that knowledge is not indestructible,
that even sophisticated societies can be disrupted by environmental events, and that innovation often arises from the interplay of survival and curiosity. The post-Younger Dryas recovery is a testament to humans' capacity to adapt, to rebuild, and to reimagine social structures, technologies, and cultural practices in the face of profound loss. It also emphasizes the role of cumulative learning. Even when previous achievements are partially erased, the human mind is capable of reconstructing, reinterpreting, and extending knowledge in ways that allow civilization to flourish once again. In reflecting on this period, it is clear that history is not a straightforward narrative of progress. The collapse and recovery around the Younger Dryas illustrate that human societies exist in a delicate balance with their environment, and that knowledge, technology, and culture are both powerful and vulnerable. Every discovery, every archaeological site, and every piece of surviving evidence offers a window into the ingenuity and resilience of our ancestors. And as modern technologies allow us to uncover more of these hidden histories, we gain not only insights into the past, but also lessons applicable to our own world, reminding us that adaptability, cooperation, and curiosity remain central to human survival. Ultimately, the rise from the Younger Dryas is a story of triumph over adversity, of humans navigating extreme conditions, losing and rediscovering knowledge, and laying the foundations for the civilizations that would follow. It is a narrative of both loss and creativity, of what was forgotten and what was rebuilt, and of the enduring. As we arrive at the final chapter of our journey through the lost epochs of human history, it is important to pause and reflect on what these gaps, these dark spaces in the archaeological record, tell us, not only about the past, but also about ourselves. The Younger Dryas, the collapses, the forgotten cultures, they are not merely historical curiosities. They are reminders of the resilience, adaptability, and creativity inherent in human societies. They show us that civilization is not a straight line of progress, but a delicate balance, constantly shaped by environmental forces, human ingenuity, and chance. One of the most striking aspects of these lost epochs is the sheer scale of what we don't know. Before 12,800 years ago, humanity had already demonstrated remarkable sophistication. Clovis tools, complex hunting strategies, and social structures that spanned continents all testify to intelligence and innovation. And yet the abrupt climate shifts disrupted these societies in ways that archaeology still struggles to fully comprehend. The result is a fragmented record, an archaeological black box that leaves us speculating, imagining, and searching for the missing pieces. These gaps invite curiosity, urging us to question, to explore, and to reconsider our assumptions about early human capabilities. Consider the possibility that early humans, even in pre-agricultural societies, may have had a deeper understanding of the world than we often give them credit for. Observations of celestial movements, seasonal cycles, animal behavior, and ecological relationships could have been encoded in oral traditions, rituals, and symbolic art. While much of this knowledge was likely lost or obscured by the Younger Dryas, fragments may have survived, influencing later societies. When we study early civilizations, we often see them as the starting point of human achievement. But in reality, they were building on millennia of accumulated, albeit partially lost, wisdom. Every invention, every technique, every cultural practice had predecessors that we may never fully know. The concept of lost knowledge is not abstract. It has tangible consequences for how we interpret history. Without the complete record, we risk underestimating the intelligence, creativity, and adaptability of our ancestors. We see gaps in tool traditions, in settlement patterns, in symbolic expression, and we are tempted to label societies as primitive or simplistic. But in reality, these gaps are not indicators of deficiency. They are artifacts of circumstance. Environmental upheaval, sea level rise, soil erosion, and catastrophic events erased evidence that could have reshaped our understanding. What remains is a partial story, filtered through survival, preservation, and chance. And in those partial stories, the imagination becomes a vital tool for inquiry, bridging the unknown with the plausible. The Younger Dryas collapse in particular highlights the vulnerability of human societies to climate change. Communities that had thrived for thousands of years were suddenly disrupted, and knowledge systems that had been developed over generations were partially lost. Yet the response to this disruption was not defeat, but adaptation. Humans rebuilt, learned anew, and eventually laid the groundwork for agriculture, urbanization, and complex governance. This pattern repeats throughout history. Humans are challenged, knowledge is threatened, societies adapt, and new forms of complexity emerge. Understanding this dynamic is crucial, not only for interpreting the past, but for navigating our present and future in a world of rapid environmental and technological change. Modern technology is now allowing us to illuminate these lost epochs in ways our predecessors could never have imagined. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR surveys, satellite imagery, DNA analysis, and ice core studies are transforming archaeology from a field constrained by excavation to one capable of revealing entire civilizations hidden beneath forests, deserts, and oceans. Each discovery reshapes textbooks, challenges assumptions, and fills gaps, sometimes partially, sometimes entirely. The Amazon basin, for instance, revealed massive settlements that were previously assumed to be uninhabited. Coastal sites, now submerged, hint at ancient societies whose knowledge of fishing, navigation, and trade may have been profound. Every technological breakthrough brings us closer to a more complete understanding, yet it also reminds us of how much has been lost forever. This brings us to the philosophical dimension of the lost epochs. What does it mean to inherit a fragmented history? How do we reconcile the brilliance of early humans with the incompleteness of the record? These questions challenge not only historians and archaeologists, but everyone interested in the human story. They remind us that knowledge is fragile, that culture can be disrupted, and that resilience is as important as invention. Our ancestors survived disasters, adapted to extreme conditions, and passed on what they could. In doing so, they laid the foundation for the civilizations we inherit today. Recognizing this legacy encourages humility. We stand on the shoulders of countless generations, many of whose contributions we may never fully comprehend. The gaps in the record also invite speculation, careful, responsible speculation based on evidence. We can imagine early humans tracking the stars, developing calendars, recording oral histories of migrations and environmental changes, experimenting with agriculture long before cities appeared, and perhaps even using symbolic systems that have since vanished. These possibilities remind us that history is not a closed book. It is an ongoing investigation, an accumulation of discoveries, interpretations, and questions. Each generation contributes new tools, perspectives, and insights, expanding our understanding of the past while acknowledging what remains unknowable. One of the most important lessons from these lost epochs is the value of curiosity. Every unanswered question is an opportunity for discovery. The voids in the record are not failures of knowledge, they are invitations to explore, to think creatively, and to investigate. Whether it is the Bronze Age collapse, the enigmatic civilizations of pre-Columbian America, or the submerged settlements along ancient coastlines, each mystery challenges us to look deeper, to ask different questions, and to consider alternative explanations. The pursuit of understanding becomes as important as the knowledge itself. Moreover, the story of human resilience and adaptation has contemporary relevance. The climate challenges faced by our ancestors, their responses to environmental stress, and their capacity to rebuild and innovate are lessons for modern societies. By studying how humans navigated past crises, we gain insights into problem solving, cooperation, and cultural continuity. These lessons, encoded in the archaeological record, offer guidance for our own complex and interconnected world. Finally, the lost epochs remind us of the wonder of discovery. Archaeology is not merely about cataloging artifacts. It is about connecting with the lives, thoughts, and struggles of humans who lived thousands of years ago. It is about imagining the landscapes they navigated, the knowledge they preserved, and the cultures they created. Every excavation, every analysis, every technological breakthrough is a bridge between the past and the present, revealing that history is alive, dynamic, and full of surprises. The gaps, the shadows, and the unknown are not obstacles. They are opportunities for engagement, imagination, and participation in the human story. In conclusion, the lost epochs of human history, particularly around the Younger Dryas, teach us humility, resilience, and curiosity. They remind us that history is not a straight line of progress, but a complex, interrupted, and adaptive journey. They encourage us to question assumptions, embrace uncertainty, and explore the unknown with rigor and imagination. And they offer hope that even in the face of disaster, human creativity, cooperation, and knowledge can endure, adapt, and flourish. The past is not only a record of what was, but a guide for what can be. By studying it, reflecting on it, and imagining it, we participate in the ongoing story of humanity, a story still being written, still full of mysteries, and still open to discovery. So, as you close this final chapter, remember, the past is not entirely lost. It survives in fragments, in artifacts, in stories, and in the genes and memories of those who endured. It survives in our curiosity, our investigations, and our imaginations. The lost epochs are a challenge and an invitation, a call to explore,